Welcome to my 25-year faith and work journey, 1995 to 2020. Well, I am married to Pamela, my beautiful wife. We met in 2015, and both of us had been single for a number of years, and we were a surprise for both of us as God led us in a very unusual meeting at a movie preview in Atlanta, and it was a movie called Captive. And it was a movie about a drug addict woman who was spared her life after being taken hostage over a 12-hour period in Atlanta. But Pamela's story is a remarkable story of redemption. She came out of drugs and actually went to prison and started a prison ministry there, and God is using her in wonderful ways. And we now live in North Atlanta with our 5 dogs. And Atlanta is a city of about 6.5 million people. We in the southeast part of the United States. I like to say that because many people out of the country don't actually know where Atlanta is. And so good to give you some geographical aspect of where we live. And I have one daughter, Karis Rebecca, and she is married to Justin. And Karis worked for me for 8 years, and during that time she wrote TGIF for Next Generation, a devotional, and recently she wrote a book called Alt Money Choices, Securing Financial Freedom One Step at a Time. And so they live only about 12, 15 minutes from us, and she is doing well. Well, I was raised in Columbia, South Carolina. I was number 4 out of 5. I had 4 sisters, and we were a very good middle-class family. My dad was in a career path to be very successful. He owned a toy store when I was growing up, and then took on vice president of a large toy distributorship in Columbia, South Carolina, and we were doing very well. And my dad and mom loved each other deeply, and as I say, he owned a toy store, and one of the things they did when they in the toy distributorship is they marketed this product called the Slinky. And of course, yo-yos. They sold 2 million yo-yos in 1966. My dad also started me playing golf when I was 11 years old, and my dad was also a pilot. He loved to fly the single-engine aircraft and wanted me to go up with him, and he would often go on business trips in this single-engine plane. And so things were going well. I give you a little background on my golf because that was such a part of my life growing up. I was a very good junior golfer. Began at age 11. By the time I was 14, I had 3 holes in one. I qualified for the U.S. Junior Amateur at 15 years old and played in Boston at Brookline Country Club. I broke my home course record of 66 at age 16, and I won our high school South Carolina 4A state championship in golf and basketball through our team. And then I got a 4-year golf scholarship to the University of South Carolina. I became a club pro for 3 years after getting out of college, and later I became a club pro in Vail, Colorado, and gave Gerald Ford golf lessons in 1977. And I have 8 hole-in-ones as of 2020 and still have a 0 handicap. And in 2020 was my super senior club champion at my home course. So I just give you that background to see how important golf was in my life and growing up. And it's a wonderful game. As you get older, you can still play a game. So I've been blessed by that. Here you can see the picture with me and Gerald Ford, and also a picture of myself winning a golf tournament. And then when I was 14 years old, my dad was killed in an airplane crash. And of course that rocked our world, and it changed everything in our lives. And of course my mom was devastated, and God actually used that accident to bring her into a personal relationship with him. Well, 1974 came around, and my goal was to play professional golf. But it was a recession at that time, and I was kind of borderline in terms of being able to attract money that would support me on the professional tour, since I really, my mom was suffering because of the insurance not paying off in our family. And so anyway, that was a big crisis event for me, to come to a realization that I was not going to achieve my dream. I moved away from Columbia to North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, hoping to really get my game in shape to be able to qualify for the tour. And but the more I tried, the more I seemed to run into roadblocks, and my dream was not going to get fulfilled. And so this was a crisis point in my life, and I began thinking about purpose and destiny, and what if I did get on the tour, what then? Why am I here on earth, and so forth. And that led me to a relationship with Jim Messick, and Jim is a pastor, actually from the church I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. He had moved to North Myrtle Beach and was a pastor there, and he began to befriend me as per my suggestion of my mother, and we began to meet and talk, and one thing led to the next, to the point that I asked Jim, what does it really mean to be a follower of Jesus? And we talked about that, and ultimately it led me to making a decision for Christ, and my life would never be the same, and never has been the same, and it was the greatest decision that I've ever made. I ended up in golf for a little while as a golf professional, but ultimately I would get out of golf. I would go into business, and I would be in various sales and marketing positions. Ultimately, I worked for an ad agency in the early 1980s and started my own advertising agency in 1982. We were a direct response advertising agency, and had clients like American Express and Steinway and Sons for the church market, Thomas Nelson Publishers, Parisian department stores, which is now Belk, and a large carpet company, and a number of other clients. And so from 1982 to 1994, I had the Aslan Group, and we were a good small agency. But then in 1994, a personal crisis came along again. And this time, my wife had come in and said, I don't want to be married anymore. And along that time, my financial advisor said, there's been a problem. The $500,000 in your investment account is gone. It was a Bernie Madoff type of situation, and I would lose 80% of my business. My client would fire me, and it would push me into a 7-year crisis from 1994 to 2001. It was during that time that God began to rebuild me as a man and a follower of Jesus. And I met Gunnar Olson about a year into my journey, and I had been I received an audio tape by Gunnar that someone had sent me, and it said that God was raising up Josephs all over the world, often signified by them going through extraordinary adversity in their business and personal life. And I said, my goodness, I have to meet that man. And so I found out he was going to be in Washington, D.C. in 2 months. I flew to Washington, and it was the night of a 75-nation conference that he was hosting as founder and president of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce. I knew nothing about them, but he was so gracious to listen to me, and as he listened to my story, he says, Os, you have a Joseph calling on your life. It's a marketplace call. And he pulled out a napkin and he drew a diagram and said, here's where you are, here's the next phase, and here's the next phase. And he says, the key is you pressing into the Lord. And so I walked in that day with a feeling a victim to my circumstance, but I walked out realizing there was a marketplace call on my life that I did not understand, but Gunnar became my spiritual father that day. So in 1995 and 1996, I was understanding more and more about the role faith played in the marketplace and our own personal lives, so much so that I started a magazine called Christians in Business. And I was very excited about that magazine, but, I'd already lost $500,000, and so here I was taking another risk. And but anyway, we did get out a few issues, and what we saw was there seemed to be a lot of activity in the marketplace among Christians. And about that time, Larry Burkett, who was a financial teacher, wrote a book called Business by the Book. And so in 1997, Larry and I had lunch together, and he said, why don't we host a meeting of some of these leaders and see what they say about God in the marketplace, what's going on. And so we set it up to have a meeting in Atlanta at the Walk Through the Bible headquarters. And but about 2 weeks or a week before the meeting, Larry calls me and says, I can't make the meeting. You're going to have to host it. And so I ended up hosting it for about 45 ministry leaders, about 75 people, 45 heads of organizations. And we just came and just, explained what we each saw God doing in the marketplace. There was certainly a birthing taking place. And so it would be in 1997 that I would start the International Coalition of Workplace Ministries. That meeting in Atlanta with Larry became the birth of Marketplace Leaders. And that would be kind of how God tricked me into getting into this whole movement. And so we began to meet with leaders of other ministries, and our tagline was one mission, separate callings, many alliances. And it ultimately would be a fellowship of 1,200 organizations around the world. We would have annual summits, and we would promote the movement. We had a very nice website, a directory of all the ministries and products and services, online catalog. And we thought it was going to become a paid association, but ultimately the decision was made that that wasn't what people wanted. They simply wanted the fellowship and the networking, and so we kept it at that. My first early book on faith and work was Faith and Work, Do They Mix? So as I was in my crisis period, 1998, I began writing some devotionals. I was really writing for myself. I would send it off my computer to friends and family, and I would miss a few days, and somebody'd say, where's my devotional? And I'd say, what do you mean, where's your devotional? You're not paying for it. And but that was the only indication that I got that people were really liking the devotional. And a friend of mine had a website that he eventually sold to crosswalk.com. He says, why don't you let me put this on our website? Then you won't have to send it off to your computer every day. So he did that, and pretty soon I was getting letters from all over the world, and they were all saying the same thing. You read my mail today. And I would get that so often that it just seemed to be touching the heart of people. And it would ultimately go to 105 countries and read by several 100,000 people daily. It came out in the first book form in 2000, and there have been a few different iterations of it in books and a website that you can access the devotional. Well, in 2001, 7 years exactly from the day I entered my crisis, I came out. God allowed me to hold on to a piece of property that I was able to sell it for 6 times what I paid for it. And so this was really kind of the birthing of what God was doing in my life through the faith and work area. And so now we have a devotional that has actually 4 devotionals that go out every day, and it's free of charge. And in 1975, Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham, when they met and talked about a dream each of them had that week, that God said to them that if we're going to impact culture, it's going to have to be through 7 areas of arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. And it was around 2000 that I actually heard this first message from Lance Wallnow. And Lance and I became friends from that time on, and we began to host international conferences on the 7 mountains. And from 2003 to 2010, we had those conferences. And around that time, we began to see faith and work being really talked about in the media. The New York Times called me one time and said they were going to do a story on faith in the workplace. And so they interviewed me 3 times and asked if I would provide a person they could build a story around, which I did. And that became a major article. There was an insert in the Sunday paper of the New York Times. We also saw the birth of corporate America affinity faith groups, in that time period of 2001, 1995, American Express, Ford Employees for Christ, Toyota, Coca-Cola. I was at the first Christian Coca-Cola meeting in the CDC in 2001. And so this was another side of the movement at that time where God was birthing. And around 1998 to 2000, we began to hear from Christian leaders, and they would say this: we recognize that there is a move of God in the workplace. C. Peter Wagner, Billy Graham and Ed Silvoso. These were more of the mission organizations, and yet they were now recognizing something that we were all seeing as well, that there was a move of God in the workplace. Well, in 2002, I got a phone call from the Billy Graham organization, and he asked me if I could come drive up to the Cove, and he says, we have heard about this move of God in the workplace and would like to know how we might serve that movement. And so I went there, one-on-one meeting with the representative from the Billy Graham Association, and we talked about what I saw going on in the whole workplace movement. And then they asked me, could I bring back a few leaders to have further discussions? And so I brought about 5 other leaders back from the heads of other ministries, and we talked further about that. And that led to a joint conference with the Billy Graham Association and the marketplace leaders at the Cove. It was about 250 leaders that came for that event. And then in 2005, we had a joint conference with our ministry and BGEA and Fellowship of Companies for Christ, and that was held at the Church of the Apostles. And so we see that other organizations were recognizing that God was moving. In 2005, CNBC did a story, a video television documentary on faith in the workplace, and I was a featured guest of that, and they interviewed me and talked about my books and so forth. In 2004, after we'd been working with the Billy Graham Association for a few years, we thought that it would be great if Dr. Graham could give us a comment about what he saw was happening in the workplace movement. And so we actually wrote 3 quotes and submitted them to him, and the one he chose is this one. I believe that one of the great next moves of God is going to be through the believers in the workplace. Well, over the next few years, God would begin to open up my whole life, and I would begin teaching workshops. I would talk about faith and work, and I would end up over the next 7 years equipping leaders in 26 different countries, people inviting me to come do my workshops and speak at conferences and events. And I would ultimately speak at Promise Keepers 3 times, and that was quite an experience as God was opening doors. And God began to lead me into more writing, and I would write 21 books as of January 2021. And so God turned my valley of Achor into a door of hope and new calling. And so sometimes God uses crisis to usher us into a larger story. And what I've discovered over the years is my purpose is to be an articulator and shepherd of foundational ideas that lead to transformation. My gifting is in teaching and equipping and connecting, convening and writing. And so God has used that in my life to affect others. I've also realized that I'm called to 3 target audiences. That is the Christian workplace believer, to help them understand the role faith plays in their life. I'm called to the Josephs, those who are going through difficult times and how to navigate their own Joseph calling. I'm also called to equip leaders to be culture shapers, to impact our culture today. So there are 7 powerful ways that marketplace leaders equip Christian marketplace leaders. Of course, the devotional is one of the key ones. We have a TGIF app, and then we have something called the Change Agent Master Mentor Program that's an online training portal that's a membership-based program. Every week we do a TGIF at Work podcast, and then we host conferences. In 2019, we held an International Culture Shapers Summit. We also do mastermind training and courses online and executive coaching. And so we're primarily an equipping organization. Our Change Agent Master Mentor Program is our most recent focus these days, where we have many online courses to be able to help men and women understand their calling and how to walk it out. And there are just 55 courses and 145 classes right now, 250 leader interviews and video case studies. Twice a month we do a Zoom call, and the cost of that program is only $19 a month. Over the last few years, I did a radio show called Faith and Work and Culture, and we had about 55 shows we produced of that. And then we have the TGIF Minute, that we have 365 of those available, but we were not able to afford the airtime for that, so those are primarily on our app today, and you can listen to those on our app. As I mentioned, we were in 2019 had the Culture Shapers Summit, and that was a gathering of about 375 leaders in the 7 cultural spheres, and it was a dynamic time of really engaging with leaders. I'd like to conclude by showing you a little summary, video summary that was done in-house, and it'll give you a picture of what's taken place in and through Marketplace Leaders over the last 25 years. So as we enter 2021, one of the new initiatives that we're focused on is the Great Awakening Project, the Spiritual War for America. We recognize that America is in a very difficult place, and if there's not a revival in America, we are looking at some very tough times ahead. So we are looking forward to sharing more about that in the coming days as God is leading many in the body of Christ to come together to collectively pray and ask God for revival in America. My good friend Doug Spada recently said, could it be that God sees the church on Monday as more important than the church on Sunday? I've been pondering that statement that he said, and I think it's a great statement because I think it's true. You know, I think that if you look at what took place in the New Testament, everything that took place was out in the marketplace. It didn't take place in the synagogue. It took place where the people were. And so we need to help the body of Christ understand the reality of Colossians 3:23, and whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. So, I believe my epitaph is going to read, "His adversities helped the many," and I believe that God uses us to impact others through our life experiences, and He wants to use those life experiences, even the negative ones, to impact the lives of others. So thank you for letting me share with you today. God bless.